Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball! Hello, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode, another fine, special episode of the Don Sullivan Show, the show where we discuss all things science, technology, and computing on a level that can and will be absorbed and understood by your average American teenager. So today we have a very interesting sort of peripheral subject to discuss. And Stephen is on, and Jeff Miller is on. And Jeff will be discussing the effects of smartphones from the perspective of his organization, Smartphone Free Childhood. I don't think I have that name right, but Jeff was about to explain and introduce himself. And as I said, Stephen's on as well. So let me introduce Jeff Miller. And Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself and fix my botching of the name of your organization.
No, you didn't do a bad job at all. So I'm Jeff Miller. I live in Massachusetts, or Arlington, Massachusetts, and I'm not a natural advocate. That's really not what I've done over the course of my life. I'm a business person. I'm in a strategy role in a company, but I'm a parent of a incoming middle schooler and an elementary schooler, and over the past couple of years, especially, but really longer than that, I've thought a lot about the effects of technology on kids. I'm a person who's very much an early adopter of technology. I in many ways, I love technology. But as I think about the impacts that technology have had on childhood, it was, getting increasingly concerning, especially as I saw my kids getting to the age where many of their friends or many of the cohort ahead of them were starting to get smartphones. And technology has played an increasing role in all of our lives, but especially in kids' lives, based on the incentives and the structure and the design of the technology, social media, et cetera. So really in 2024, there was a grassroots movement that kind of exploded around the country and world. And that was catalyzed by The Anxious Generation, which is a book that was put out in that time frame by Jonathan Haidt. And around that time, I corralled a group of people in my town that were interested in talking about this topic and made a Facebook group, and we started talking. And it sort of led from one thing to another, really by networking with other people in this space. And I got involved really at every level that I could get involved, even while holding down a full-time job. So as I think about it, this starts in your home and then extends to your town and your state and your country. And at each level, there's something that you can do in this space that can make a modest difference or a larger difference, depending on what it is. So Smartphone Free Childhood US is the group I got involved with nationally. And the goal of that group is really to help seed and foster these grassroots movements throughout the country, because everybody's reinventing the wheel in their own home, in their own town, in their own school, doing the same kinds of things, having a school board or school committee public comment, or doing a PTO presentation, or having a contract with their kid about what the kid can and can't do on their phone or their device. And all of those things, were kind of put on parents without them asking for it. They were put on parents' plates, and everybody was reinventing the wheel all at the same time. And one of the things I really value and have valued over the course of my career is efficiency and sharing knowledge. And so I was doing some of these things in my own household, in my own community. And I said, hey, I'm happy to share what I'm doing. And Smartphone Free Childhood US really started as a WhatsApp group, and then it was spun out by a really successful group called Smartphone Free Childhood in the UK that has created a lot of social change in the UK. The US version was a spin-off of that. I've since gotten involved with a Massachusetts organization that's focused on similar types of activities, but really at the local level, where there's some things you can only do in person. Meet with other advocates in other communities, share physical resources like signs and banners. And so I've gotten involved at that level. And then in my own community, I have a group called TechWise Arlington that is really where I put many of my thoughts about how to approach these problems, and then try to get a parent-to-parent conversation going.
Why Arlington?
Why Arlington? Arlington is just it's a great community right outside Boston. People know Arlington is outside of DC, and at some point, 150 years ago, part of DC, right? But okay, yeah, good. Yeah, Arlington, Massachusetts was actually named after the Arlington National Cemetery, which is outside of DC. So yeah.
Well, Jeff, I can't think of anything, and I don't mean this hyperbolically, anything more noble in 2026 than this effort, and we are absolutely thrilled to have on your show. And to start off the show, again, of course, I have to read the disclaimer for.
I was going to say, Sean's going to be mad.
Sean's going to be mad, but here we go. All statements by the host and the guest on the Don Sullivan Show are the personal opinions of the host and the guest, all of who agree that the following content is the property of Xanalytics LLC to be used publicly and exclusively on the Don Sullivan Show. And even though the audience can't see it, we're all shaking our heads, and so we're good to go. And before I introduce Steve, I'm going to, I don't usually do this, but I really want to encourage everyone in the audience in the Don Sullivan Show to check out the show notes, because Jeff and the organization Smartphone Free Childhood has an unbelievable PSA, which is as striking as a light beer from Miller commercial, and if the series Mad Men was still out, they would have an entire episode on that PSA alone, I think. Please stay around to the end, and we'll talk about that a little bit and look at the show notes. But go ahead, Stephen. Let's introduce everything else about the show.
Yes. Greetings from the Garden State. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. You can learn more at licensefortress.com, and please support our producer by visiting axtinc.com. That's AXTINK.com. Subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation and slake his unquestionable lust for tiny soaps from hotel bathrooms. Back to you, Don.
Well, we're going to be able to talk to him tonight, because we're all going to meet tonight about that. See if he comes and shares with us the soaps from the hotel.
His latest findings. That's true. Yeah, going to the American Dream Mall. Lucky us.
Yeah. All right, so I want to start off with a bit of a prelude here to set up this subject. Some people might think that this is outside of the umbrella of science, technology, and computing, but it's not. This is the ultimate psychological or psychiatric issue of our time, and I would add into it other aspects that are at least laterally connected, such as online gambling, and other things which are really, really important to this subject. But this is a subject that, despite my obvious adventurous frivolity, is the closest and dearest to my heart. We have an accelerating problem in Western civilization. That is children, and not just the lack of kids. The U.S. is sitting around 1.8 children per woman, about 10% below the actual mathematical replacement rate. Most of the world outside of Africa has the same problem. We are actually better than most, but it's still a major problem. Much worse is the environments in which we're allowing children to grow up in. On one side, the great majority of kids have every imaginable device and access to everything that has ever been produced in the history of the world right at their fingertips. At 6 years old, kids can play with video games and manage them better than most adults. So they sometimes dominate their lives with these overwhelming dopamine-driven screens. I recently witnessed a highly athletic 6-year-old become so engrossed in a racing-oriented video game that he literally played for hours beyond his profuse complaints of his finger hurting. Now, normally, the old saying with doctors is, "Hey, doctor, it hurts when I do this," and the doctor says, "Well, stop doing that." Well, this guy was telling this kid to stop doing that, but he didn't stop. He just kept playing. On the other side is the increase of our increasingly polarized culture. We have millions of kids, mostly in the inner cities. A special emphasis here on teenagers that have very, very little resources. For example, I think that you could say that 99% of some of the kids or teenage kids that sit under the poverty line, especially in the inner cities, have never been to a single national park. This is the American third world is very, very real in this sense. This bipolar crisis needs an answer. So, Jeff, how do we fix this problem? Pick either one.
Look, I think that you've touched on some of these points, but really, the experience is that we've overprotected kids in the real world, and we've and given them fewer freedoms, and then we've underprotected them in the online world, where by giving them unfettered access to screens, as you suggested. So I think both of those elements need to change going forward, and I think the overprotection in the real world probably gets less press than the underprotection on the online world, right? Kids need to have childhoods that include freedom, that include exploration, that include going to parks, going to playgrounds.
Bring back that metal jungle gym. Remember those? They were like a death sentence. Bring them back.
Einstein said play is the greatest form of research, and that is one of the most profound things he ever said. So
yeah. I was reading a study this morning that said that about 60% of American kids that are 17 years old are still not allowed to leave their neighborhood unsupervised. So that's pretty alarming.
Really?
So
that's shocking.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. There's a new study out that goes through every age group and what freedoms they have, both online and in terms of actual real life, and it's pretty alarming. So
we might be in a different town at that age at night.
That's right.
As long as you had a bicycle, you can get around to anywhere. And
well, at 17, somebody had a car, So
and there's really some very interesting research that's out there about the generational differences in Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, but particularly Gen Z because they're now teenagers and adults. The generational differences between them and every other generation that came before them in terms of when they took risks, when they did the things that we think of as entering adulthood, things, some of them that are not ideal behaviors like drinking, but having sex,
kind of rites of passage in this country in a weird way. Yeah.
And when you talk about fertility and marriage crisis the declining childhood birth rate, some of those things affect that too, right?
Yep,
people are having relationships later in life, and there's many causes for those things. But if you think about it, the screens that are put in front of them are an experience blocker, right? They block time out of their day that could be spent doing other things, could be spent face to face, could be spent interacting with other
hours
human
and
beings.
Hours. Yeah.
Well, when it comes to relationships, they are substitutes as well, which is existentially destructive.
Yeah,
exactly.
I was reading that. I listened to about half that book, The Anxious Generation, and some of the notions in it. I was like, oh, that makes sense. These are things I kind of suspected, but I was blown away by the breadth of the scope of the problem, and also just the research that's like, this is really bad, and here's why.
I'm reading it now as well because you told me to. Stephen, because you told us to, Jeff. So there we go. And the audience should read it as well. The Anxious Generation.
Yeah, just shocking.
That book, as I mentioned, it came out in 2024, but it really synthesized research that had been done for 8 or 9 years before that, and showed that over the past decade, we've seen rates of anxiety, depression, suicidality increase among our young people at rates that we hadn't seen before. And the question is, what was driving that? And if you look across societies across the world, you see around 2012 a tipping point, a turning point where that was the same time that Facebook bought Instagram. That was the same time that Apple iPhones went from being just on one cellular provider to on all of the cellular providers, and the social media companies moved from being primarily desktop applications to being mobile applications. And so over that time, that generation who grew up in the 2012 and on timeframe had much more technology in their lives than we did beforehand. And as you know, and I'm sure as you talk about often in your podcast, the business model of these technology companies is advertising, and the
we do
more the more time that they have to advertise, and the more space and the more engaging that advertisement, the more money they make. And when their customer base includes just adults, that's one thing. When it includes kids, they're still incented to maximize the time spent on device, maximize the time spent on an application, and sell that time to advertisers. So we don't pay subscription fees to Facebook. We don't pay subscription fees to TikTok. And it's because we are not the customers of TikTok. It's the advertisers that are the customers.
No, we're the product.
We're the product. Yeah,
and it's designed to be addictive. Yeah,
that's right.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So, Jeff, do the screens have any value absent extremely careful management before, say, college age, at least 16?
Sure, and look, screens is a broad term. I
didn't mean it to be that broad. Go ahead.
Yeah. There's a lot happening right now, and there's grassroots pushback on many different types of screens across society. So, smartphones, take that for example. There are about 150,000 American parents who have pledged to wait until at least the end of 8th grade to give their child a smartphone. There's no proven age at which a smartphone is safe for a kid, but at the same time, for a developing brain, you're putting it's really, smartphone is a misnomer. It's a fully fledged entertainment device. It's a supercomputer that's connected to the entirety of the internet.
I agree.
So for a 7th or 8th grader, and really honestly for a 9th grader or 10th grader, there's a lot out there that parents might not feel comfortable with their kids accessing, that once you have access to a device like that, you really have access to the entirety of the internet. So there are some folks out there that suggest the time to give a kid a smartphone is around the time that they get a driver's license, because maybe then at that point they need the GPS to go drive around. They may need to be in more communication. They're going much further afield than they otherwise would be. I think that's a reasonable place to think about. It would
certainly be a great start, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
For the parents who say, I want my kid to always be able to call me, what's the response? Like, bring back beepers, get him a dumb phone. Like, what's the deal there?
Well,
there's phones. There's a lot of great options for that, including some that are designed specifically for that purpose. Many of my 11-year-olds friends currently have watches that basically only text approved numbers or can call approved numbers. And so that's a way to have sort of a limited device that allows them to contact their parents if they're stuck at soccer practice and it's raining. They need to get picked up, or if they are leaving middle school and want to go somewhere that their parents aren't aware of. There's also, as you said, dumb phones that are that look like a smartphone but have much more limited features. They do not have access to the full app store.
And not much different than a long-range walkie-talkie in that sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we thought those were cool.
Yeah. So I think those are definitely options. At the same time, it's not required to have any device. I think parents have grown up in a world where when we were kids, we didn't have devices to contact our parents. We used a payphone, or we told our parents where we were going to go after school,
or we didn't
showed up when
and got in trouble.
Right. Right. Or we showed up when it got dark outside and it was time to go home and eat dinner. Right. And so I think current parents today have quite a bit of anxiety about letting their kid go across town without any device to track them.
You can certainly argue that the density of depravity in society has increased over the last multiple generations. And so therefore there is an acute fear that exists that is amplified by the media and exaggerated hyperbolically. But at the same time, as Jeff, you've pointed out, the freedoms are necessary to develop.
I think it's probably exaggerated or amplified more than it actually. I mean, we had more serial killers in the 70s, and it's more safe now. We have like Amber.
It is more safe. Really, the rates of child abduction, the rates of violent crime have gone down dramatically since the 90s, when we were really in the heart. Steve and I were in the heart of our childhood and teenagehood. So it's actually about the safest time it's ever been to be outside as a kid. And yet it's the most dangerous time to be on the internet when you're a kid, because that's where the child abduction happens.
Most of the creeps are hanging out on the internet these days. Yeah, it's easier. They don't just have to go after one. They can go after a whole group of kids.
And yes, it involves online predation, but it also can turn into in real life predation. So that's where the grooming happens. That's where the CSAM exchange happens, is on the internet. And so by giving a kid a fully fledged smartphone with full access to the internet, you have to accept that you're taking risks and putting your child in a place where they don't have the freedom. I would much rather my kid be walking across town. Now, granted, I live in a safe town. I have that privilege and that I feel very lucky to live in a place where I feel very comfortable with my kids walking down the street. But I had an example the other day where my 7-year-old, who's very independent, she was really excited with her other 7-year-old and 8-year-old friends to walk down the street to the library, which is about 2 blocks away. They wanted to walk down and get a book, each get books and read for a little bit and then come back. And I was thrilled with it. I said, "This is great independence. I'd love for you to do this. Go for it." And they walked down as a group. They were all together. It was totally safe. They walked into the library, got books, and then my wife was going to meet them about half an hour later and walk them to get ice cream. When my wife showed up, the librarian met her outside the library and said, "Our policy is, if they're not 10 years old, they can't be in the library unattended." She was very gracious about it. She was not rude. She didn't call the police or anything. But at the same time, I think about, that group of 7-year-olds was not at any risk. They were perfectly safe. If the parents feel comfortable with them walking down the street and walking to the library, that should absolutely be something that they can do. And in our society, because of the child abduction, and the milk cartons that really were out there in the 80s and 90s, people have a fear of it, but I do think that fear is well overstated.
Well, and in the context is so important. As you said, you're in an area that is relatively safe, and the metrics would bear that out, obviously. And the motto of the Don Sullivan Show is all at bats are situational, right, Stephen? So in the context of the situation you just described, obviously that was a totally appropriate exercise you went through, and unfortunately you're kind of subtly blocked from it at this point when it's not.
I think that's a liability thing. Is the library policy? It's probably liability,
that's right. Yeah, I think the litigation, the litigious society has certainly contributed to it as well.
That doesn't help either. That's why all the playgrounds are different now too.
So, Jeff, obviously the parents have the most immediate control, assuming they both exist and participate, followed by the schools and the government in terms of having authority and control. Why don't parents take control at this point? And how does your organization, Smartphone Free Childhood, encourage and facilitate them, even if you do, to actually change their way of thinking and take some control?
Sure. So parents obviously are on the front lines of these discussions, but it is not an individual decision that drives outcomes here. Each parent in this situation is probably fighting with their own child or having discussions with their own child, making decisions for their own child about discipline, etc. But the bigger issue is it's a collective action. It's a collective action problem. So when we think about what is driving the child to be so motivated to get a phone at a certain age, it's because at a certain age, there's a tipping point where all of their friends have phones, and that's where the communication starts to happen. So if my sixth grader, who today has no device, and next year when he's in middle school, all of his friends are only communicating with each other on Snapchat, and that's where all the fun happens. That's where all the discussion happens. That's where all the meetups are planned. That makes it very challenging for him from a social perspective. So parents don't want to put their kids in a situation where there's social alienation. And then you come back to the point about freedom and walking around town or being further afield than they might otherwise be. People want to keep tabs of where their kids are. So I think the social coordination piece comes in at which parents have these discussions with their kids, and they're anxiety provoking discussions. They're not easy discussions to have, but they don't exactly know that the parent next door is having the same conversation, or the dozens of parents in their grade are having exactly the same conversation, the same anxieties. What was really interesting about the Anxious Generation book that came out is it really catalyzed that feeling. And there's an interesting concept out there about common knowledge. It's like the emperor's new clothes. When the emperor was out there walking naked, and all of the people around him, they knew that he was naked, but they weren't willing to point and laugh and say this guy is crazy until the emperor was walking out in the parade, and the child burst out laughing and said the emperor is naked, and then everybody knew that everybody else knew, and that's really what catalyzed it. And then the king or the emperor was embarrassed, right? That's the same kind of thing that happened with smartphones. Everybody realized not only that they were having that conversation, not only suspecting that others were having that conversation, but everybody knew that everybody knew that everybody knew. And that recursive common knowledge was really key to igniting this movement, which has really taken place across the United States. As I mentioned, about 150,000 people have signed to Wait Until 8th Pledge. And when you have the Wait Until 8th Pledge, for example, it's a local school-based coordination where if 10 people in my son's grade agree not to give their kid a smartphone until at least the end of 8th grade, then we will all get emails saying there's now a pledge that's been activated, and all 10 of you have pledged not to give your kid a smartphone. And therefore, when your kid comes to you in 6th grade and says, everyone else in the grade has a smartphone, you could say, that's not true. I know at least 10. I know at least 10 that don't.
And it does put social pressure on the other parents, I'm assuming, as well. It forces a decision one way or another.
At least awareness.
Yeah.
And my perspective on this is parents are not the enemy. Kids are not the enemy. It's individual incentives in one's own household. People trying to do the best thing for their family, but also trying not to alienate their kids. And so, allowing for that social coordination, it flips the script a bit. And I think that's really important.
So, on a sort of somewhat different note, the obvious depravity of the content aside, just as I've noticed recently with my grandkids, the fixation on the device, and again, the example that I gave earlier of this kid having his finger hurting and refusing to give up this device, playing this racing game, seems to be, and again, without being a psychologist or trying to pretend to be one, there seems to be something so wrong about that fixation and so innately damaging. Where do you think the line is in that? And just in terms of the time?
Well, Don, I know from one of your prior episodes, you spent time in Vegas. Just think about the person sitting at the slot machine,
I
pulling
do. It's a
pulling
great
that lever
example. Yep.
over and
And
over
they're an
again.
adult.
Right?
They're an adult.
They're an adult, but the technology of the slot machine is built to keep you engaged.
Yeah, it's the same
give
thing.
you,
It's the same. It's the same purpose. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
right. It's
I'm
a
sorry.
variable
Yeah.
reward system which hacks the brain and says, sends the signal that if you keep doing this, eventually and intermittently, you're going to get rewarded, and so it keeps you there. Those are the people who design the slot machines are the same types of people, same sort of PhDs that design the social media and design the video games and the design features, which are really the persuasive design features of these video games and the social media in particular. I think social media and short form video tools have those in the most extreme formats. But video games, look, Steve and I grew up playing lots of video games. I think that it's a whole spectrum of what video games exist today. And I think I struggle with setting limits for my own child on video games. At the same time, I do see when there's half a dozen 11-year-old boys around my household and they're playing video games in a social way for an hour before going out to the basketball hoop, I'm fine with that, right? And you asked about, should screens be completely eliminated from their lives? I think it's kid by kid, and I would not want my kid sitting there playing video games for the entire day and not getting outside. But if they're playing it in a social setting or they're playing it in a way where it's time bound, I think it can be fine.
Well,
now,
it just
again,
bothered me so much that his finger was hurting that he kept shaking it, but he wouldn't stop.
He had the
And it seemed to be
fever. He
something
was,
that is biologically wrong about that.
He was like addicted kind of to the
Yeah,
game.
he was okay with being in pain because he just was so completely, again, I'll use the word again, fixated on continuing to do the same basic routine of that particular game over and over and over again. Now, in this particular case, we started on an airplane, and that was a couple of hours. But then when we got to the hotel, it was still the same thing until we ripped it away from him, literally.
Yeah, and I'm sure when you did rip it away from them, it was not an easy. It was not
No,
an easy.
it was not.
Right, not easy to regulate your emotions because they are the devices and the software pushes a lot of buttons in your nervous system, and it's a very common challenge to have a kid have a tantrum when it's time to stop the video game, and I've dealt with that with my own kids for sure.
Yeah.
So,
you almost the detox stories sorry to interrupt, Don, but in the book, The Anxious Generation, they were talking about how, they took their kid off social media for a month or whatever it is, and they started feeling better. It's kind of amazing, but it almost is kind of like a drug where like they have to detox off of it and come down to like a baseline and get outside more. It really was fascinating.
And you've seen the recent litigation results that have come out of LA or California and New Mexico that have treated the social media companies more in the vein of big tobacco for the addictive features. And you're starting to see a groundswell of political momentum on that from that perspective that focuses on the addictive features that the products have. And maybe those addictive features we're comfortable with adults interacting with. But should kids interact with that? Should kids be able to accept terms of service that when they're 13 years old or really under 13, because they can just check a box or flip a date to say that they're 13 years old? Should they be allowed to be part of that business model at that age when really they can't accept any contract in in any other part of their life, but they can accept a terms of service that essentially gives away all of their data to social media companies.
The best is those illicit sites are like the national, way to prevent children from visiting them was like, well, just tell us if you're 18. If you're not, like just,
Obviously,
yes or no.
meaningless.
Nobody's going to get around that one. Like, you're 18, right?
Jeff, this is a perfect segue to a question as to whether or not you think, if you do have an opinion on this, this is better regulated on a local and a state level, or does this really need to be regulated on a federal level?
Look, I think it depends on the topic, probably, and we haven't even really touched on AI yet. But I think that I'll go into a couple of examples. At the state level, we've seen very good momentum for phone-free schools.
Yes.
Now, I think that's a black and white issue, in my opinion, because smartphones arrived in schools. Nobody chose to put them in schools; they just arrived in pockets, and so. Can we justify their presence in schools given the distraction that they create? I don't think there's any valid justification that they should be in pockets
Jeff,
in schools.
I taught in high school when I left college in the 80s and 90s, and that would have been an utter nightmare to me. And I 100% agree with you. You would have been able to get nothing done as a teacher if kids of any kind had any devices with them. They didn't even have computers at that point.
Right.
I didn't even realize they could have phones in schools. That sounds insane to me. Like
they could have phones. The tide is turning on this, and again, it's because of the groundswell of parental. The groundswell of parents rising up all across the country in red and blue districts. In fact, there's more red states that have passed these laws than blue states at this point, and it's one of the few bipartisan issues out there.
Virginia, though, is pretty much in the forefront of it, isn't it?
It's one of the states, but honestly,
bipartisan, which is great.
Right. That's right. And beyond just the distraction in the actual classroom, there's just the impact to social environment if kids are sitting in the lunchroom or study hall on their phones watching TikTok instead of interacting with each other, right? That's just disastrous for society.
Or cyberbullying, et cetera, Right. Yeah.
And in fact, many there's been many issues around fights in schools where everybody pulls out their smartphone and streams it, and it builds on itself and gets completely out of control because of that. So at the state level, we've had quite a bit of success regulating phone-free schools. And the reason that works at the state level, it's very challenging. It's challenging to do it at your local individual school district level because each individual school district is subject to the whims of their own superintendent and their own school committee. And so there's definitely been many parents out there that have been on the front lines of that advocacy, and many schools that have adopted bell-to-bell phone-free school policies in that setting. But it's literally town by town, and if you have a superintendent that's not bought into it or has other priorities, then it's incredibly challenging. So there's a state level question of, is this providing benefits to have smartphones in schools, or is it detracting from our overall environment?
I think we know the answer to that.
Right. Now, when it comes to the federal level, there's many differences between states. So I think that probably at the federal level, that wouldn't be appropriate, and it's more appropriate at the state level. Now, AI, for example, is something where I think probably the federal level is what's going to need to handle that. There's many of the issues we talked about. We didn't spend time on how AI is changing, changing childhood. It's really just starting to change childhood. But just as engaging as the social media is and the short form video, AI chatbots can be incredibly engaging, and they can be your AI boyfriend or your AI girlfriend.
Yeah, that's happening. Tell you how to commit suicide. Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on.
That's right. And so should there be regulations around treating these companies as having product liability if their products cause harm in children, and there's litigation out there now around that, exactly those topics, and there are bills pending in Congress around specifically those topics. Again, it's actually a bipartisan issue. You have folks like Josh Hawley that are coming out there with discussions around these points on the Republican side. You have people in Massachusetts like Jake Auchenglass talking about these kinds of issues. You have Bernie Sanders and Steve Bannon both having very
Josh
strong
Hawley,
views.
Steve Bannon and Bernie Sanders on the same side. We got to have some yeah. I mean, I'm a really cynical guy, but if I see something like that, I'm like, oh, wow, something positive is happening here.
Yeah, and so it's definitely, it crosses partisan lines, but at the same time, there's very, very strong monetary interests that are in play here, and there's incredible lobbying pressure.
Just control of the world.
So that's a perfect segue into how I really want to, at least for a moment, take this conversation into an area that, again, is really near and dear to my heart, and that is the alternatives to what kids are doing, and not just the obvious sports that we used to all do a lot more prevalently in the streets. I mean, I cannot tell you the amount of time I spent playing touch football in the middle of the streets, which nobody does anymore at all. But I'm thinking of it in a much broader sense. Again, I mentioned earlier in the episode that we have this problem with non-affluent kids who may be in inner cities, who may not have parents, who may be very much below the poverty line, having no access to the plethora of riches that we have in the United States, particularly areas like the national parks. I look at, unfortunately, the whole system of parks, federal parks, state parks, is almost having been built now to be playgrounds for the affluent. And how can we fix or start to fix this problem, or make it part of the solution, to reintroduce the notion of young people experiencing the greatest parts of America without incurring the risk of the fiscal conservatives? I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, the ultimate Republican from the early 1900s, he believed that all Americans should experience everything in America, and that's why he created the national park system, basically. And I know there's an expense with it, but is this possible to do? This is something that's been very important to me. We're in national parks all the time, and honestly, they are really, really inaccessible to anybody that doesn't have a lot of resources at hand.
Yeah, look, I think that it's a great point, and it's an important issue. What I would say is we can start a lot smaller than that. In fact, the populations that you just referenced, the lower income populations, the statistics are actually showing that those populations actually spend more time on the device, even than the average American. And so that's blocking their experience even at a local level. So when we start talking about national parks, it would be great. Let's just start talking about the park across the street.
Yep.
And even having an opportunity to go to the library,
go in your neighborhood,
go to the local parks,
outside,
go to the playgrounds. Having those small wins, which I'm very sympathetic to parents or in some cases no parents who are in those kinds of settings, and the electronic device serves as a babysitter to some degree, in the same way maybe that Sesame Street did in the 80s and 90s, or 70s and 80s and 90s. At the same time, there are third places that exist even in urban low-income environments, libraries and parks and boys and girls clubs and facilities like that, and the local basketball court and so on. And we need to encourage people to allow their children out into those places, and to have some freedom. Granted, there are a lot more risks in a place like that than there are in the town where I'm raising my children. So I am sympathetic to that. When it comes to further afield things like getting kids out to national parks, I think I would love to hear some ideas coming from our politics about how we could enable that. Those are probably more challenging.
I got lots of ideas. And we have shows on that.
When I last time I was at Yellowstone, there are lots and lots of buses filled with people from various countries outside the United States, and I don't think all of them are incredibly wealthy.
Well, here's an idea for you, Don. If you take the school Chromebook budgets and you cut those in half, and you use that savings to add some field trips into the mix, I think you'd be better off.
Aren't you going to get a new RV? Why don't you start an association?
Well, believe me, that is not beyond the realm of my imagination. It hasn't been for a long time.
Could be
So,
like Don's
yes,
magic school bus, get these kids into
well,
the
there's
woods.
so many other aspects to the difficulties involved in things like that. Just starting a little league team is next to impossible from a legal perspective these days. But it is something that is very much the endpoint of where I see the solution to all of this. But Jeff, what do you think are the most important steps to take right now?
Sure. So I think that starting in your own home is important, but really talking to parents in your communities is critical as well for the collective action problem that I mentioned earlier. So making decisions in your own family to delay the smartphone, in my opinion, it'd be great to delay it till at least 16, but let's say until high school, and to then go onto the soccer sidelines and talk to the parents who are standing there, because they're probably feeling the same way, is my guess. People are anxious to have that conversation, but there's many of them that are probably feeling exactly the same way as you. And if you start that conversation, it can snowball and really turn into momentum, and it has in many, many communities throughout the United States.
Do you see this getting better in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, as I mentioned, AI is something that's on my mind constantly. And I think that it's one of the topics that I think there needs to be a lot more education of parents on. I just hosted an event a couple nights ago about AI in education and how that's changing education. I think it's one of the topics that I could see it snowballing in a way that makes it much worse in the next 5 years. I could also see grassroots groundswell around that topic and other topics that continues to head in the right direction. I think absent AI, I feel like we're heading in the right direction.
More awareness
with a lot more awareness around smartphones, around social media, around tech in schools, and really trying to find the right moderation around that. We're having wins all across the board, both at the individual family level, at the community level, at the school level, at the state level, and at the federal level. But AI is a wild card, in my opinion, and it's something that is really rapidly changing society, and it has the potential to rapidly change childhood. And parents, on average, are not very well informed about AI. I feel that I'm pretty well informed about it, and I actually use it daily in my own career, and I see the power that it can bring to that. At the same time, I also know that every homework assignment I ever did, I could have snapped a picture and gotten it and had it completed by a AI tool. And that is an incredibly powerful temptation for a kid. And so I think we have a lot to grapple with there, and that's putting aside even the companion bots and things like the suicide coach concern that Steve raised earlier. There's a lot that could potentially change here.
Suicide coach, oh my
or
God.
The fake nudes that can now be created, using certain apps. Like it's the Wild West.
Yeah, they did that.
Fake videos.
Star Trek did that with the holodeck, 25 years ago, and it's real now.
Yeah, and that's even before you start to think about just non-childhood impacts of AI around, if the kid's parents have been laid off because of a massive change in AI driving unemployment, and there's political unrest around that. There's a lot that could happen in society. I think COVID proved extremely well that the world and this society, in the United States, we do not react well to rapid change. It is not something we are cut out for. Silicon Valley, people are comfortable with disruptive change. People in the broader parts of the country are not comfortable with rapid technological change or disruptive change. They do not want to go learn a brand new set of skills overnight and have everything that they worked for. They're focused on clocking in at 9 a.m., clocking out at 5 p.m., feeding their families, and not completely reinventing themselves at 45 or 55 or 65 years old.
And
there's a lot to come there.
What's funny about that too is at one point we were told to code, people in blue collar positions were told to learn how to code. Now it's almost the opposite. They might be, people in blue collar positions might be, if you know how to plumb or do electricity or whatever for a data center, you might be, you might have an advantage there, I guess. I don't know, but I agree.
Learn to code was an epic failure.
Yeah, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well,
now
Stephen,
Claude can do it for you.
Thank you for being the first person to seriously digress and not be me on this particular show.
Oh,
but
you know me,
Jeff. What I will simply add and end this particular episode with is stating that I believe that this should be and will be note to Congress, do it sooner than later, to create an agency under Health and Human Services and make you the director of that particular agency in Health and Human Services to directly address this sooner than later. I'm serious. I think that makes total sense.
We'll set up the webpage. We'll get Bill to set it up. We'll start taking donations. All above
Does
board.
RFK Jr. is my boss?
Yeah, maybe.
Administrations change, but effective people stay. Okay, so there you go. What I will say, folks, is again, thank you, Jeff. You got any last words here before we close this one out?
I'll just say smartphonefreechildhoodus.com is the website of my organization. Be happy to get in contact with folks if they want to reach out directly as well.
And that will be in the show notes. And again, everyone listening to the vast audience of the Don Sullivan Show, please watch that 1 minute long PSA. As I said, and I was not really saying that sarcastically, but if the show Mad Men was still around, they could actually have an episode on how that was brilliantly created. You have to watch it because it makes total sense and it's incredibly entertaining at the same time. So it's in the show notes. Watch it. Stephen, how about you? Anything left to add?
No, this was perfect. Jeff, we'll have to get you back at some point as we dig deeper into AI issues related to childhood.
Deeper to any aspect of this. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully by the next time I join, all the problems will have been solved.
Yes. And that's because you're going to be director of the Childhood Smartphone Free Agency of HHS. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right, folks, remember, no matter what we're doing, whether or not I'm going through a surgery, we're talking about AI, or I'm climbing up a mountain, or doing whatever else we do here in the Don Sullivan Show, remember one thing and one thing alone that will direct your life, and that is that all at-bats are situational.